Something is happening in Texas that nobody saw coming. The state that spent the last 5 years being the #1 destination for people fleeing California, New York, and Illinois is now watching its own housing market crack. Not everywhere, but in specific cities, home prices are falling fast, inventory is piling up, sellers are cutting prices over and over again, and buyers are still walking away. Texas was supposed to be the safe bet, the affordable alternative, the place where your money actually went somewhere. And for a while, it was. But the same thing that happened to California is now happening here. Prices got ahead of what people can actually afford, and now the market is correcting. Today we are counting down the Texas cities where home prices are falling the fastest in 2026. If you own property in any of these places, you need to hear this. If you are thinking about buying, this might actually be your window. Let us get into it. Starting the list with a city that should tell you everything about what went wrong. Killeen sits in central Texas, about 60 miles north of Austin. Home to Fort Cavazos, one of the largest military installations in the entire country. For years, Killeen looked like a stable housing market. You had a constant population of military families, steady rental demand, and home prices that were genuinely affordable even by Texas standards. Then investors noticed. During the pandemic boom, outside buyers flooded in looking for cheap entry points in Texas real estate. Prices jumped fast. Properties that had no business selling for $280,000 were suddenly listed at $320,000 and $340,000. And people paid it because everything was going up and nobody wanted to miss out. Now the hangover is real. Active listings in Killeen have surged and days on market have stretched past 90 in many zip codes. Price reductions are happening across the board. The problem is that military families rotate constantly. They do not build generational wealth in a city. They arrive, they live there for 2 or 3 years, and they leave. The investor math that assumed permanent demand was always flawed. And now the sellers who bought at peak prices are finding out that the buyer they were counting on does not exist at those numbers. Killeen is not collapsing. But if you bought here in 2021 or 2022 thinking you were getting a safe long-term asset, your equity is thinner than you think. And that is just the beginning of this list. The next city is one that made national headlines during the boom for all the wrong reasons. Moving up the list to a place that became a symbol of the Texas real estate frenzy. San Antonio is the 7th largest city in the United States. Over 1.4 million people in the city proper. Strong military presence with Joint Base San Antonio, a growing healthcare sector, and a tourism economy built around the Riverwalk and the Alamo. On paper, San Antonio looks bulletproof. But the numbers are telling a different story right now. Inventory in San Antonio has more than doubled compared to pre-pandemic levels. The city consistently ranks among the top metros nationwide for price reductions, with a significant share of active listings having been cut at least once. The median home price has softened noticeably from its peak, and for buyers who stretched to purchase in 2022 at top of market prices, the current situation is uncomfortable. The issue is a familiar one. San Antonio attracted massive speculative investment during the boom. Builders put up new construction across the metro at a pace that outran actual population growth. And while the city is still growing, it is not growing fast enough to absorb all that inventory at the prices sellers are still asking. Insurance costs have climbed here too. Parts of San Antonio and the surrounding hill country are now classified in higher wildfire risk zones, pushing premiums up in a way that adds to the monthly carrying cost for buyers. When you add rising insurance, higher mortgage rates, and inflated list prices together, the math stops working for a huge chunk of potential buyers. And sellers who are not cutting deep enough are simply sitting. San Antonio is not crashing. But for a city this size to have this much inventory pressure and this many price reductions, something has clearly shifted. And the city after this one shows just how fast things can turn. Right in the middle of this list sits a place that exploded during the remote work wave and is now dealing with the consequences harder than almost anywhere else in the state. This is a great time to subscribe if you want to keep up with what is really happening in real estate markets across the country. Hit that button and you will not miss the next breakdown. Midland and Odessa sit in the Permian Basin in West Texas, about 20 miles apart, and for decades their story was simple. Oil prices go up. Home prices go up. Oil prices go down. Everything suffers. The boom and bust cycle was just part of life out there. But the pandemic added a new layer that made this cycle more dangerous than the ones before it. When oil surged in 2021 and 2022, outside investors who had never cared about Midland and Odessa suddenly showed up. They saw cheap prices, strong rental yields driven by oil worker demand, and what looked like a floor under the market. Homes were flipped. Prices climbed. New listings sat on the market for days, not weeks. Then oil price volatility returned, the energy sector cooled, and the remote workers who had briefly considered West Texas as an option realized there was very little reason to live in the Permian Basin if you did not work in energy. Inventory has climbed sharply in both cities. Price reductions are common. Properties that were listed aggressively are being cut 5, 10, even 15% before finding a buyer. And for investors holding rental properties who are watching their yields compress as operating costs climb, the exit math is becoming unfavorable. Midland and Odessa are exactly the kind of markets that look stable right from a distance and show cracks up close. The oil economy provides a floor, but it also creates a ceiling, and right now prices are bumping up against that ceiling hard. The next entry on this list surprised even people who follow Texas real estate closely. Moving further into the list and into territory that will genuinely catch people off guard. Waco has spent the last decade building a completely new identity. Before Chip and Joanna Gaines, most people outside Texas had never given Waco a second thought. After the Magnolia brand took off, the city became a tourist destination, a real estate investment target, and a housing market that nobody expected to get hot. And it got very hot. Short-term rental investors poured into Waco. Homes near the Magnolia silos and downtown were flipped and relisted as Airbnbs at premium prices. New buyers believed the tourism-driven demand would keep appreciating values. The median home price in Waco climbed significantly above what local incomes historically supported. Now the short-term rental market is softening across the country as inventory on platforms like Airbnb has flooded in. Cities have begun cracking down on rental regulations. And the buyers who paid a tourism premium for a Waco home are discovering that the return on investment math does not work the way it did when the market was thinner. Active listings in Waco are up, price cuts are frequent, and the days when a house near downtown would get multiple offers over asking are clearly over. This is a market that was pulled up by a brand identity rather than fundamentals. And when the brand cools, the prices follow. What comes next is a city where the numbers are genuinely alarming. We are getting into the top half of this list, and the data here is harder to dismiss. Lubbock is a city of about 260,000 people in the Texas Panhandle, home to Texas Tech University, and for a long time it was considered one of the most stable housing markets in Texas. Affordable prices, steady population from the university, and an economy diverse enough across agriculture, healthcare, and education to avoid the single industry trap. But affordability is relative. Even in Lubbock, prices climbed dramatically during the pandemic. And now those inflated prices are sitting in a market where the buyer pool is smaller than sellers expected. Inventory has risen sharply. The percentage of listings with price reductions is well above the state average. Homes in certain Lubbock zip codes are selling for notably less than they were 18 months ago. The university provides a baseline of demand, but student renters and young faculty are not the buyers who drove prices to peak levels. Those buyers came from outside, made assumptions about continued appreciation, and are now either stuck holding or cutting their prices to find a real buyer. The wind energy sector has brought some jobs, but not enough to change the housing math in a meaningful way. Lubbock is a city where the correction is slow and steady rather than dramatic, but it is real and it is ongoing. For anyone sitting on an over-leveraged property here, every month that passes is another month of carrying costs with no recovery in sight. And if Lubbock surprised you, the next one will too. Because we are entering the part of this list where the numbers get serious. Drop a comment below and tell me which Texas city you are watching right now. The conversations in the comments section on these videos are always more honest than any headline you will read. Corpus Christi sits on the Texas Gulf Coast, a city of about 320,000 people with a major port, a naval air station, a petrochemical industry, and beaches that draw tourists from across the state. It sounds like a city with too much going for it to show up on a list like this. But the housing data does not care about what a city has going for it in theory. Corpus Christi home prices climbed dramatically during the pandemic as coastal living became desirable to remote workers who suddenly did not need to be near a major office. Demand from San Antonio and Houston buyers looking for a second home or a permanent move pushed prices well above what the local Corpus Christi economy could naturally support. Now that wave has receded, and what is left behind is elevated inventory, longer days on market, and a pattern of price reductions that tells you sellers priced for a buyer pool that no longer exists in those numbers. The insurance situation on the Gulf Coast is another factor. Hurricane risk in Corpus Christi is real and ongoing. Insurance premiums for coastal properties have climbed sharply, and some carriers have pulled back from certain zip codes entirely. When you add a high mortgage payment to a high insurance bill on a property that may have lost value from its peak, the math for buyers becomes very hard to justify. Sellers who understand this are cutting. Sellers who do not are sitting with listings that have been active for months. The city coming up next has one of the most dramatic stories on this entire list. And it involves a level of overbuilding that almost nobody was talking about while it was happening. Getting close to the top of this list and into territory where the word correction does not quite cover what is going on. Round Rock sits just north of Austin in Williamson County, and for about a decade it was one of the fastest-growing cities in the entire United States. Dell Technologies is headquartered there. The proximity to Austin's tech economy made it a natural destination for workers who could not afford Austin proper. Master-planned communities went up in every direction. National builders poured in. It looked like demand was limitless. It was not. When Austin's tech economy softened following the layoff waves of 2023 and 2024, Round Rock absorbed the impact directly. The workers who had been the primary buyer pool were either laid off, moved to cheaper states, or stopped being able to afford mortgages at current rates on homes that were still priced as if Austin's boom was permanent. Active listings in Round Rock and the broader Williamson County market have climbed significantly. Builder incentives on new construction are aggressive. Rate buydowns, closing cost credits, free upgrades, and outright price reductions have become standard at new developments that cannot move inventory at the prices they were listed 18 months ago. The resale market is feeling the same pressure. Every new home that a builder sells with a $50,000 incentive package quietly lowers the comparable value for every existing home in the neighborhood. And those existing homeowners are finding that out the hard way when they try to list. What is at the top of this list is the city that has been talked about more than any other in the context of a Texas housing correction. And the data behind it is impossible to ignore. If you are finding this breakdown useful, hit subscribe. This channel covers real estate markets across the country with the kind of detail that most channels skip over. You will want to see what comes next. Number 2 on this list is a name you already know. Austin, the capital of Texas. Population about 980,000 in the city proper and over 2 million in the metro. For a brief period around 2021 and 2022, Austin was one of the hottest housing markets on the planet. Tech companies were relocating headquarters here. Remote workers were flooding in from California and New York. International investment was arriving. And home prices reflected all of that demand plus a speculative premium on top. The median home price in Austin peaked above $650,000. For a Texas city that had been considered affordable just 5 years earlier, that was an extraordinary number. Then the tide went out. The tech layoffs hit Austin harder than almost any other metro. Remote work policies tightened at the companies that had relocated here. Some of those companies downsized their Austin footprints. Elon Musk's companies brought people, but they also created volatility. And the workers who followed are not necessarily long-term homeowners in the way that a stable tech economy produces. Austin has now recorded one of the largest year-over-year home price declines of any major metro in the United States. Certain zip codes in East Austin and the suburbs are down 15 to 20% from peak. Condo inventory in particular is severe, with units sitting on the market for months and multiple price cuts before finding a buyer. New construction from builders who broke ground during the peak is completing into a market that cannot absorb it at current prices. The whole value proposition of Austin was that it was the affordable version of San Francisco. When prices hit San Francisco levels, that proposition collapsed. And unlike San Francisco, Austin does not have 60 years of supply constraints and coastal geography holding prices up. It has flat land, flexible zoning, and builders who are perfectly willing to keep building. The correction in Austin is real, it is documented, and it is ongoing. Show Austin downtown skyline, 6th Street footage, for sale signs. And number 1 on this list is a city that tells the complete Texas housing story in a single zip code. The top spot on this list goes to a place that became the ultimate symbol of the pandemic real estate frenzy and is now ground zero for the correction. McKinney, Texas. Sitting in Collin County about 30 miles north of Dallas, McKinney spent years being named the fastest-growing city in America. New master-planned communities stretched across the former farmland in every direction. Frisco was to the south doing the same thing. The entire Collin County corridor became a massive speculative bet that the Dallas metro would keep expanding indefinitely and that buyers would keep accepting higher and higher prices for new construction that was being built further and further from actual job centers. During the pandemic, that bet looked brilliant. Prices in McKinney doubled in roughly 3 years. Investors from California, New York, and internationally bought sight unseen. Builders could not put up homes fast enough. Waiting lists formed at new developments. And then it stopped. Mortgage rates above 6.5% broke the affordability math for the buyer who had been driving McKinney prices. That buyer was almost always someone moving from a more expensive market who was willing to stretch because they believed Texas appreciation would continue. When appreciation stopped and rates climbed, that buyer disappeared. What is left in McKinney right now is extraordinary inventory. Builders are sitting on completed homes with incentive packages that would have been unthinkable in 2021. Price reductions of $40,000 and $50,000 on new construction. Rate buydowns that add tens of thousands of dollars of cost to move a single home. Resale sellers competing directly with builder incentives and losing. Days on market stretching past 120 in certain sections of the city. And prices in the hardest-hit zip codes that are 15 to 25% below their 2022 peaks. McKinney is not a bad city. The schools are good, the infrastructure is new, and the location relative to Dallas is real. But it was priced for a future that has not arrived on the timeline that buyers and builders assumed. The people who bought here at peak to flip or to hold short-term are in serious trouble. The people who bought to live there for 20 years will probably be fine eventually. The question is how long eventually takes. Show McKinney masterplan neighborhoods, builder signage, aerial footage of new subdivisions. And that is the uncomfortable reality across all of these Texas cities. The state is still growing. The fundamentals are still better than most of the country. But the prices that were set during one of the most speculative housing markets in American history are not automatically justified by those fundamentals. Corrections happen when prices get too far ahead of what people can actually afford to pay. And across these 10 cities, that is exactly what is happening right now. If you own in any of these markets and you are thinking about selling, the clock is not necessarily running out, but the longer you wait, the more competition you will face from builders who are willing to cut. If you are a buyer, patient offers below asking are moving in markets that were untouchable 2 years ago. The window may not stay open forever. Tell me in the comments which Texas city you think has the most risk going forward and whether you think this is a temporary correction or something longer lasting. I read every comment on these videos and the answers are always more interesting than anything the headlines report.